19th. The emperor had passed a better night, but the morbific systems had lost nothing of their intensity. The pain in the head was, however, less violent, and the greenish cast of the face and the yellow tinge of the conjunctiva were also rather softened. The sensation of heaviness in the abdomen had disappeared, but had been succeeded by one of intolerable suffering, and by pains in the liver much more violent than before bath. The pulse was more regular, and the skin less dry and burning. 20th, same state. The emperor went to take a ride in the calash, but returned in a few minutes exhausted with fatigue. 21st, same state of health. I advised tonics internally and blisters on the arm and the nape of the neck. In particular, insisted upon opening an issue in the left arm. But Napoleon rejected every prescription that was recommended to him. I informed the Grand Marshal and General Montalon of the emperor's situation. 22nd, the emperor was better. After having taken a bath, wishing to breathe the open air, he tried to ride on horseback or in the calash, but fatigue and indisposition soon obliged him to come back and go to bed. 23rd, the emperor's health in the same state. He, however, persisted in attempting to take the air. He rode on horseback and in the calash, but after having gone a short distance, he found himself compelled to return again and go to bed. He continued to try this kind of exercise for some days, persuading himself that motion is the first of remedies. But what with the heat of the sun, his cough, and shiverings that ran through all his limbs, he was obliged to give up the attempt. He again renewed it 2 days after, and alternately experiencing relief and relapses. He reached the 3rd of October, on which day he experienced a general torpor, which was only dispelled by his being placed near the fire. The lower extremities were a long time getting warm, and this result had hardly been obtained before he was seized with convulsive contractions and a sensation of extreme heaviness in the head. 4th October. The emperor came in at 2:00 p.m. extremely tired and went to bed, desiring that he might not be disturbed. He had taken a ride of 2 leagues and a half, partly on horseback and partly in the calash, had rested at Sandy Bay Ridge, and stopped at Mr. Doveton's, where he breakfasted and drank, he said, 3 glasses of champagne. He experienced a violent headache and a general sensation of uneasiness, dry and nervous cough, face extremely pale, eyes sunk, pulse low and nervous. 5th, the emperor continued to complain of headache, which was, however, less violent than yesterday. The pain in the liver had considerably increased and extended as far as the right shoulder, and he still felt a most troublesome heaviness and a deep pain in the left hypochondriac region. No sensible alteration had occurred in the other symptoms. He took a little exercise in the garden. 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th, the bad weather prevented the emperor from taking his ride in the calash, but he took a walk in the garden, which he got into a bath heated to a high degree of temperature. I endeavored to oppose this practice, but he told me it was followed in Egypt and that he had derived the most beneficial results from it. Your colleagues then were also not sparing of their remonstrances. I should catch the blank. I cannot tell you what complaints I was to catch. Well, I caught none, and remained in perfect health. My instincts served me better than the science of Hippocrates, and my brush and flannel were more efficacious than all the efforts of his followers. This does not apply to you, doctor, in whose skill I place the greatest confidence, but I have the benefit of my own experience, and am also rather tenacious of my opinions. 10th, the emperor remained an hour in his bath, and was obliged to get out of it to go to bed, being so weak that he almost fainted. His strength did not return after he had been in bed. His face was pale, approaching to yellow, and he experienced a sensation of icy coldness all over the body. The senses, particularly that of hearing, seemed impaired, pulse slow and irregular. 11th, 12th, 13th, the emperor's health had not improved. On the contrary, his strength appeared to decline. He woke in the middle of the night with a violent headache and in a state of costiveness. The extremities were deadly cold. His frame shook. He felt palpitations in the heart and a general uneasiness, agitation in the abdomen, pain in the region of the sternum, breathing difficult, dry and nervous cough. His weakness was such that the slightest movement was sufficient to produce vertigos. At 2:00 in the morning, the costiveness ceased, and he had copious evacuations, which were followed by excessive debility. From 3 to 5 o'clock, the intensity of these various symptoms diminished, but a new pain made its appearance, extending down the vertebral column, from the nape of the neck and the shoulders to the middle of the back. 14th, the emperor slept from 6 o'clock until 9 and woke with a deep pain in the left side of the head. The pain in the sternum still continued, pulse low and regular. I advised emollients and insisted upon the application of blisters. Doctor, said Napoleon, no physicking. We are, as I have already often told you, a machine made to live. We are organized for that purpose, and such is our nature. Do not counteract the living principle. Let it alone. Leave it at liberty to defend itself. It will do better than your drugs. Our body is a watch that is intended to go a given time. The watchmaker cannot open it, and must, in handling it, grope his way blindfold and at random. For once that he assists and relieves it by dint of tormenting it with his crooked instruments, he injures it 10 times, and at last destroys it. Thinking probably that this comparison, which had particularly struck his fancy, had not convinced me, he began to discuss the uncertainty of medicine and the danger arising from the drugs which the faculty distribute indiscriminately, and added, "You are aware, doctor, that the art of healing consists only in lulling and calming the imagination. That is the reason why the ancients dressed up in robes and adopted a costume striking and imposing. That costume you have unadvisedly abandoned, and in so doing, you have exposed the imposture of Galen, and no longer exercise the same powerful influence over your patients. Who knows whether, if you were suddenly to appear before me with an enormous wig, a cap, and a long train, I should not take you for the god of health, whereas you are only the god of medicines." The emperor, fearing lest I should again renew my importunities, endeavored to elude them by joking on the subject, but mirth also affords relief to sufferings, and I therefore prolonged the conversation as much as possible. 15th, the emperor had passed a quiet night. The pain in the head was still felt. That of the sternum extended round the right breast, and the dry cough continued, with frequent and insipid rectations from the stomach. The patient had eaten with a tolerable appetite, and his pulse, though low, was regular, but the paleness of the face, lips, and all the limbs had reached the highest pitch. At last I obtained leave to apply blisters, and put 2 on the arm. At 1 o'clock, which only began to operate at 5, perpetual state of agitation the whole day. 16th, the blisters were removed. Very little serosity was found beneath the portions of the cuticle they had raised, and the paleness of the skin below was not altered. The blister on the left side seems to have produced a greater effect than that on the right, but neither had acted powerfully. The agitation continued. The pain in the head and chest had disappeared, but the cough had increased. The skin was dry and burning, pulse slow and nervous. At 4 o'clock in the morning, an abundant evacuation accompanied with violent gripings. At 11, the cough still lasted. The headache returned. The pulse was low but regular. Napoleon took a walk 2 hours in the garden, and towards evening his strength improved, and the headache left him. 17th, the emperor had passed a bad night, having suffered slight pain of colic, accompanied by frequent evacuations. He was, when I saw him at 9 o'clock, rather better. Pulse low but regular, and strength returning. A walk in the garden improved this favorable state. At sunset, the patient experienced a general sensation of languor, which was dispelled by taking little food. 18th, Napoleon a little better. He went out, walked a few minutes in the garden, and returned to bed towards 8 o'clock. The coldness of the feet extended by degrees up to the thighs, but by constant application of hot towels, the natural heat was restored. Pulse regular and low. 19th, the emperor a little better, but at sunset the lower extremities again became cold. The blisters were dried up. Pulse as usual. 20th, the emperor rather better. He went out in the calash, rode 2 hours, and came in exhausted with fatigue. He had scarcely got into bed before the coldness of the lower extremities appeared with increased violence, but was dispelled by degrees and succeeded by a burning heat, which spread all over the body, and was followed by a general calm, pulse slow and nervous. Napoleon tolerably well. He took a bath in which he remained about 3/4 of an hour. At 12 o'clock, he went out into the garden, conversing upon the facilities and the obstacles he had met with at the period of the consulate. The armies were discouraged, beaten, driven on the line of the Var. The enemy were close to our frontiers, but were threatened with an invasion. But population fled to arms. All came forward. We marched, and France was saved. Napoleon entered into the most minute details. He spoke of Valognes, the reports in circulation at the time, and of the spirit which animated the South. The picture did not much agree with the statement made by a noble emigrant in the Tribune, and with the offensive preparations which the inconceivable Battle of Marengo rendered unavailing. The Marquis must certainly have made a mistake as to numbers. An army of 25,000 men possessed of courage does not remain concealed and wait to be beaten to arms until the enemy has left the field of battle. However, I do not insist on this point. I merely recommend the following document to the consideration of this occult general. It is worth comparing with the muster rolls, Antibes 20th Floreal, 8th year of the Republic, 10th May, 1800. The prefect of the Department of the Var to the Minister of War, citizen minister, by a concourse of unfortunate circumstances added to grave errors, the Department of the Var has in 8 days become an open frontier, seriously threatened by a superior enemy. Tomorrow, even this night, it may be the scene of an invasion followed by fire and devastation. Lines rendered formidable by their position have been abandoned, and the town of Nice was this morning evacuated. 18,000 Austrians line the left bank of the Var, and there only remains between them and us a torrent, the passage of which is defended by 4,000 or 5,000 men of troops discouraged and commanded by generals who do not agree together. On the first intimation of this retrograde movement, I proceeded to the line of the Var. I sought in vain for an enemy instead of one. I only saw soldiers dispersed and wounded, abandoned on the roads, and sighing after hospitals, which do not exist. The retreat of every branch of the army is directed towards the interior and is pushed on as far as Marseille. A host of employees of every description is flying, accompanied by covered wagons, the excessive load of which excites strong suspicion against the persons on whose account they journey. In the midst of this confusion, of which it is impossible to form an idea, I have not lost courage and have endeavored to form an army. By marching on the Var, all the movable columns of the department with supplies for 5 days. At my voice, the peasantry have left their fields and unyoked their plows, and 1,200 horses or mules perform the service of military transports. This measure will deceive and awe the enemy for a few days, but he has secret communications with the interior and will soon penetrate the secret of our weakness. It is therefore urgent to provide for the defense of this frontier and have recourse to regular and adequate means. I have seen at Antibes General Oudinot, and have thought that I might, nay, that I ought to ask him what were his means of defense, what line he thought of occupying, on what points he wished the levies of citizens to be directed, and lastly, what description of assistance he stood in need of, and to what amount. I have offered to place myself at the head of my department on the points of the most exposed and threatened. I'm still waiting for his answer, obliged by his delay to take upon myself the duty of this general towards you. I think it right to inform you that the movable columns are marching, that they hasten from every point to the headquarters at Antibes, and that success is crowned this first measure. At the same time, however, you will permit me to lay before you the following considerations. I think, first, that no reliance ought to be placed on Antibes on account of its unfavorable situation in a country covered and commanded by heights. If it is attacked with artillery, it will not hold out 8 days. If it is merely blockaded, it will equally be compelled to surrender, since it is unprovisioned. Secondly, that reliance cannot be placed on the movable columns at the time of the harvest, which is drawing near. Will recall the husbandmen who form the greatest proportion of these columns to their fields, and it will be impossible to check desertion. Thirdly, that advantage must therefore be taken without loss of time of the effect the imposing appearance of this levy will produce on the enemy, to assemble troops of the line, and to give them, above all, an intelligent commander, and one whose reputation may put an end to all private rivalry. Fourthly, that with the reinforcement of 6,000 men of good troops, and by mustering the movable columns of the department of the Bouches-du-Rhône, the department may be covered by fortifying the line of the Esteron and the post of Gillette. The enemy will not dare to penetrate into the interior without possessing that post. The country is too much intersected by mountains to allow the Austrians to engage in it, unless they are masters of the upper department, through which alone they could effect a retreat. Fifthly, that no apprehension needed be entertained with respect to the means of subsistence, but that it is absolutely necessary to supply the means of transport, which the Department of the Var could not do. I feel that I am perhaps entering too much into details to which I might be expected to be a stranger, but the communication is confidential, the information true and impartial, and it is essential that you should not be deceived by reports resting on slight foundation or framed with interested views. Watch over Toulon. That important place is also destitute of provisions and inadequately provided with arms. We may still be saved by the methodical sloth of the Austrians, but the least delay on our part might be the cause of great evils and considerable losses to the Republic. Respectfully yours, Fauché.